Two people are sitting in a parked car just after midnight. Another car pulls in behind them. It sits there a second. Then it leaves. And if it had just kept driving, that night would have ended very differently. But it came back. That's the part that stays with me about this case. Not the violence, the decision. Somebody sat in the dark, drove away, and then chose to turn around. This is one of 4 attacks tied to a man who, within a few months, did something almost no killer does. He didn't just disappear, he wrote to the newspaper, he sent codes, he gave himself a name, and he dared an entire city to figure out who he was. For over 50 years, they couldn't. You probably know this case by the movie, David Fincher's Zodiac. And here's the strange thing about that film. The scariest moment in it isn't a murder, it's a man at a desk staring at paper, letters, symbols, dates, handwriting, details that might mean everything or nothing, because this was never really a story about catching a killer. It's a story about what it does to people when they can't, but to understand how it got that far, you have to go back to where it actually started, months before that parking lot. To a quiet road outside Benicia, California, where it began as something much smaller and much sadder than a legend. It started as 2 kids who never came home. Lake Herman Road, December 20th, 1968. It was the very first attack in the whole case, months before any letter, any code, any name. It was the kind of place young couples used because it was quiet, a little removed from everything. A place where the dark felt private instead of dangerous. That night, 17-year-old David Faraday and 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen were there together. Young, ordinary, fragile life, the kind of night that should have become a small family memory told years later. Instead, it became the first confirmed attack connected to the Zodiac case. A car, a confrontation. 2 teenagers left near the road. We're not going to dwell on the graphic details. What matters for this story is what came after, which at first was almost nothing. No crosshair symbol, no coded messages, no letters from a voice trying to make itself famous. Just 2 teenagers dead on a lonely road, and a community trying to understand whether this was personal, random, or something no one had a category for yet. That's the part people forget. The case didn't begin as a myth. It began as a local murder investigation, and for months, that was all anyone had. A road, 2 young victims, and no answer. Then came the 4th of July weekend, Vallejo, California, Blue Rock Springs Park. Just after midnight, July 5th, 1969. Darlene Ferrin and Michael Mageau were sitting in Darlene's car. Another place people went to be away from everything. And this is that parking lot, the one from the very beginning. According to police reporting summarized in the case files, another car pulled in. It left, then it came back. Because that's the thing, if a car just pulls in, maybe it's nothing. If it leaves, maybe the moment's over. But when it returns, the person inside has made a decision. A man approached with a light. Michael Mageau first thought it might be a police officer. Then the shooting started. Darlene Ferrin died, Michael Mageau survived, and because he survived, the case changed. Now police had a living witness, a description, a second attack site, and then, minutes later, something happened that changed it even more. A man called the police. He gave the location of the attack, then he said he was also responsible for the 2 kids on Lake Herman Road. That's the moment this stops being only violence. It becomes performance. Not just a crime. A person trying to control the story after it's over. On July 31st, 1969, 3 Bay Area newspapers received letters. The San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald. Each one included a piece of a cipher, and each was signed with a strange symbol, a circle with a cross through it like a gun sight. That symbol would become his signature. The writer claimed the Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs attacks, demanded the cipher be printed, and threatened more violence if it wasn't. Think about what that does to a newsroom. This wasn't a private note to police. It was a public trap. Print it, and you give him the attention he wants. Don't, and you live with what he might do next. And it put the public inside the case. People at breakfast tables could now read what the killer wanted them to read. They could see the cipher. They could try to solve it. A few days later, another letter arrived. It opened with a line that became infamous. "This is the Zodiac speaking." That's where the name enters. Not from police, not from a courtroom, from the person claiming the crimes, and a name is powerful. Once he called himself Zodiac, he wasn't an unknown suspect anymore. He was a voice in the newspaper, a fear people could recognize before they ever knew his face. The first cipher, the 408, was solved by a California couple, Donald and Betty Harden. It didn't reveal his name. And that's the pattern that's going to repeat for the next 50 years. The public kept getting clues. The clues just never delivered the ending. By September 27, 1969, the Zodiac was already in the papers. People knew about the letters, the ciphers, the name. Then came Lake Berryessa. Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were spending the day near the lake in Napa County. It should have been one of the safest-looking scenes in the whole story. Open air, daylight, water, a young couple away from the noise. Then a man appeared, and this time he wasn't an unseen shooter in the dark. He wore a hooded costume, and stitched onto the front of it was that same gun sight symbol from the letters. That detail is almost hard to process because it feels invented for a movie. But this is one of those moments where reality was already theatrical before Hollywood ever touched it. According to survivor accounts and later case summaries, he claimed to be an escaped convict, tied them up, and attacked them. Brian Hartnell survived. Cecilia Shepard died 2 days later. And then he walked to Hartnell's car and wrote on the door dates, locations, the same symbol. Again, a claim. That car door tells you everything about him. The crime alone was never enough. He had to leave a record. He had to make sure the world understood this was part of a story he thought he was writing. 2 weeks later, the case moved into San Francisco. October 11th, 1969. A cab driver named Paul Stein picked up a passenger. Stein was 29. He was working, an ordinary job, an ordinary night, in a city full of movement. The passenger gave him a destination in Presidio Heights, a quiet residential area. At Washington and Cherry Streets, Paul Stein was killed. And this one was different. Not a couple parked somewhere remote, not a lake. A taxi in a neighborhood on a city street. Witnesses saw a man at the cab and called police. A composite sketch followed, the face most people picture when they think of this case. 2 days later, the Chronicle received a letter. Inside was a piece of Paul Stein's shirt. That's how he proved he was connected, not claiming from a distance anymore. He had physical proof. And then he threatened a school bus. That changed the emotional reach of the whole case. It wasn't lovers' lanes and parks and adults out at night anymore. Now parents had to picture children on a bus route. David Fincher has said he remembered growing up in that atmosphere. School buses being followed by patrol cars after the threats. That's the part the movie captures so well. The case didn't stay at the crime scenes. It spread into newspapers, into living rooms, into school mornings, into the question every parent asks when the world starts to feel unstable. Can I protect my kid from something I can't even identify? After Paul Stein, the case became a maze. More letters, some authenticated, some disputed, some almost certainly hoaxes. Suspects came and went, theories multiplied, and the letters kept claiming things. More victims, other cities. So many claims that investigators had a second problem on top of catching him. Figuring out which of them were even real. Hold on to that question. It matters later. Sitting in the middle of all of it was one unsolved code. The 340 cipher mailed to the Chronicle in November 1969. People gave years to that thing. Professional investigators, amateur code breakers, people who weren't even born when it was sent. Then, in 2020, 51 years later, a team finally cracked it. The FBI confirmed the solution. Half a century of work, a real solved message from the killer himself. And it didn't contain his name. That's this entire case in a single moment. You can wait 50 years, solve the impossible, and still end up exactly where you started. A clue can be real and still not be enough. So here's why Fincher's Zodiac works. It's not because it turns the case into a clean thriller. It's because it refuses to. The 2007 film is based on Robert Graysmith's books and follows the case through investigators, journalists, and Graysmith himself, a cartoonist at the Chronicle. But it isn't built like a normal serial killer film. It doesn't give you the payoff those movies promise. Instead, it gives you process. Files, phone calls, interviews, old reports, conflicting memories, a suspect who seems right until he doesn't, a detail that feels huge until another detail weakens it, and then another year passes, and another. That's the truth of this case in movie form. Obsession doesn't always end in clarity. Sometimes it ends with a box of files and a person still awake at night staring at one more page. The movie understood that the scariest part of Zodiac isn't only the killer, it's the possibility that the evidence can surround you and still never let you out. It's not just the fear of him, it's the fear of almost knowing. Now, like every episode, we separate the movie from the real case. Zodiac is careful compared to a lot of true crime films, but it's still a movie. It compresses time, it picks a point of view, it follows Graysmith more closely than some investigators would agree with. It gives emotional shape to a case that, in real life, is messier and more unresolved. And here's the biggest guardrail. The Zodiac killer has never been officially identified. There are suspects, theories, books, documentaries, people absolutely convinced they know who did it, but convinced is not the same as proven. Arthur Lee Allen was a major suspect and he's central to the movie's dramatic focus, but he was never convicted as the Zodiac. Other names have been proposed over the years. Some get headlines, some sound persuasive until you look closer. Some are built more on pattern hunting than the proof. And remember those claims at the question of which were even real. Here's where it lands. When you strip out the disputed letters and the unproven boasts, the confirmed case is smaller and somehow heavier than the myth. The confirmed case is 5 deaths and 2 surviving victims across 4 attacks, from 1968 to 1969. He sent letters and ciphers to newspapers, some authenticated, others disputed or hoaxed. 2 ciphers have been solved, including the 340 in 2020, and it remains one of America's most famous unsolved investigations. Scream was about fear becoming fiction. Zodiac is about uncertainty becoming fiction. Fincher didn't need to invent a monster with supernatural powers. The real case already had the part that scares people most. Someone could appear, vanish, write to the paper, threaten the public, and leave everyone arguing for decades about who he was. The real case never handed Hollywood a clean ending. So Fincher made a movie about the lack of one, and that might be the most honest choice he could have made. So, is Zodiac based on a true story? Yeah, it is. But the honest answer is heavier than that. It's based on a true case that never did the one thing stories are supposed to do. It never gave anyone the ending. The victims were real. The letters were real. The codes were real. The fear was real. The answer just never came. Because most crime movies let you walk away knowing who did it. Zodiac leaves you holding exactly what the detectives, the reporters, and the families were left holding. A name on a letter, a symbol on a page, a stack of files that never closed, and one question that, after everything, still hasn't stopped moving. How does someone leave this many traces and still disappear? Everyone in this story got close. That was the trick of it. Close was the closest anyone ever got. If you want episode 3, drop a comment with the movie that should be next. And if you want more stories about the real cases behind modern movies, like and subscribe.